Now, you know we're going to start something different this evening. I don't really know how long we're going to go, but it was really laid on my heart during our little vacation where I had some time to read and be with the Lord and with my family. And I'm just going to talk as long as I have something to say, but I certainly would like for this is one teaching. No, we are going to do one teaching, but it's not going to be anything historical, so it's not going to be technical. And if we just had desks in here, we could really make it a classroom type environment. But I do kind of hope it'll be kind of like a fireside discussion is the way it should be conducted, I think, to really benefit from our study. We're going to be studying about temptation, of course. Temptation from Satan's point of view, from demons' point of view, in a very real and very lively fashion. And I don't know that we're really, well, I don't think that we really will be saying anything new, but it will be interesting to look in some pages of this book as we go for the next few weeks or so, and see how these things have been covered so many times in our church, but maybe to have them all put together in a certain train of thought. But by a fireside chat or a fireside discussion, what I mean by that is be thinking as we're going along here. And maybe we will need to discuss some of these things to make the argument of Satan to try to tempt the Christian, to make that more understandable and more meaningful to you. My heart has certainly been warmed by reviewing some of this material and going over this, and I hope yours will be as well. And it just comes from so many different areas, temptation in so many different types of areas. So we're not going to do a biblical study. I don't even know that we'll get into the Bible a whole lot. We're not going to do a biblical study of temptation and study the words and the original languages and where it's all found in different types of temptation. That's for other types of studies that we're doing around here many times anyway, where we give you all those types of notes. This is a thinking study. Christianity is a thinking man's religion. Our critics would say that it's not, but I think even in our introductory message tonight we'll prove even more so than maybe ever before that Christianity is a thinking man's religion. And any other religion certainly isn't. That's new to a lot of charismatics because they're kind of, anti your brain, just turn your brain off and just let your spirit go. And they make these big divisions between, this is intellectual and this is more practical over here. But intellectual things should be practical, and when you do something practically, it should be done with your brain as well, though. In other words, that's an unnecessary dichotomy that so many people draw between these things. That's unnecessary, that's unfair, that's untruthful, that's inaccurate, and so forth. As you'll see tonight, I think that truth always has one answer. Biblical, spiritual type truth always has one answer, but it has two sides, though. What most people want is one answer with one side. That's all they want, is one answer with one side. And we'll see this, hopefully, from the Scriptures tonight. Clive Staples Lewis. Have you ever heard of him before? You might know him as C.S. Lewis. Some people are better known by their initials. C.S. Lewis, who lived from 1898 to 1963. Is the man that we're going to be discussing in some of his works, particularly the Screwtape Letters. Now, you may have read the Screwtape Letters before. I'm sure you couldn't quote most of it to me, so I'm not too concerned about whether or not you've read it. You may have a copy of them at home. If you don't, there may be a bookstore nearby where you can obtain a copy, and you're certainly free to do that if you wish. However, I might add, you may find it more enjoyable to come not knowing what we're going to be talking about, not knowing what the chapter in Screwtape is going to be about, so you can just start thinking right then instead of going through the whole process before you get here. And I'm going to avoid the temptation, like I would like to do, to give you a whole biography of C.S. Lewis, as well as to give you a bibliography of C.S. Lewis's writings. But I will just read from a common Christian dictionary a few things about Lewis for those of you who know next to nothing about him except maybe the Chronicles of Narnia and Screwtape, as well as his initials, C.S. He was a novelist, poet, and apologist. Now, do you know what an apologist is? He's probably, well, I think that he is. He is certainly a thinking man's theologian. He and Francis Schaeffer, probably this century's two best known and greatest, and they rank there, Christian apologists. An apologist is one who, well, I guess he's got more than one purpose. He's one who defends Christianity against untrue, inaccurate accusations. Paul was certainly an apologist. I mean, all of the prophets and apostles were apologists. They weren't called as such. We really don't have that name being used until the 2nd century of Christian history. We have people like Justin Martyr, who wrote what we called apologies, but apology was the older term for what we would now term a defense of the faith. A defense of the faith of Christianity against untrue, inaccurate accusations. And I think I just alluded to one of those to start with tonight, where so many people out there, so many of these pseudo-intellectuals think and would say as much, that Christianity is the non-thinking man's religion. And that's an untrue and that's an inaccurate perception of Christianity. But you see, it's based on their fallacious observance of things they think to be true Christianity. They look at denominationalism, they look at institutionalism. People like that have charged Christianity with being a religion for people who are weak, both in mind and heart, and spine and knees and many other places as well. That's not true. And I think the whole account, the biblical account of the people of God who were true people, true Christians in the New Testament, shows that Christianity is not the weak man's religion. It is not an emotional backdoor escape to this life's problems. Now maybe that's the way a lot of people in institutionalism live their type of Christian life, but that's not the Christianity of the New Testament though. So anything that's an untrue, inaccurate accusation against Christianity, the apologist would level his guns on that. And I think he's also one that shows Christianity's on rational footing. The charismatic today doesn't like to hear that. But I think that's because we're maybe talking about two different definitions of rationale. Christianity does exist on rational footing. It's by no means illogical or unreasonable. I mean, if Christianity is unreasonable, we know what we mean by reason, something that makes sense. And it makes sense because it's true. If Christianity is unreasonable, then I don't think we want to have any part with it then. If the Bible is unreasonable, illogical, non-rational, it's a fairy tale then. And that's what they're trying to make it out to be. The pseudo-intellectuals out there. Christianity stands on very rational footing. And again, we're going to look at one good example before we're through tonight. But this is where Lewis spent a lot of his time. Now, he had very diversified talents, so being an apologist was not his only calling in life. But he was a very strong atheist right up into his adult life. And he had a very dramatic conversion to Christ. And he became, on the same level, an opponent of non-Christian views as he had been an opponent of Christian views prior. He was an Anglican layman who taught at both Oxford and Cambridge. Belfast-born Lewis, he's an Irishman, of course, attracted wide readership during and after the Second World War because he had, as C.E.M. Joad wrote, the rare gift of making righteousness readable. He's certainly not a dry theologian. Now, he doesn't have formal training. He was a professor of ancient literature, if I remember correctly, at Cambridge. He was not a theologian in any formal sense. But he had one of those rare gifts of a brilliantly logical mind, calculating, very perceptive, very discerning, and he could see through porous arguments. He burst on the scene in 1941 with the clever satire Screwtape Letters, instructions from a senior devil to a junior devil on how to snatch a new Christian from the snare of heaven. Soon after, Lewis delivered a series of 29 widely popular broadcast talks on basic Christian doctrine. They were, like Lewis's later writings, traditionally orthodox. He avoided denominational distinctives, and he called it Mere Christianity. And later in the 50s, I think he ends up with a book entitled Mere Christianity. And it's interesting that I've said these things. Now, I've read Lewis before, but I'm not just a tremendously avid Lewis fan. I have nothing against the man. It's just that because he's not a theologian, he is an apologist, I've not spent a whole lot of my time reading him. But it's very interesting that we've said some of these very same things here. What have we talked about? That we're not anything unusual or different. We just practice normal, regular, basic Christianity, or just mere Christianity. We don't try to make it out to be, this is something deeply esoteric. And it's mostly the people out there in some type of walk, whether it's charismatic or non, that color their and call their little group or their little movement, this group, that we have these distinctives, and we're deeper and we're more unusual and we have more radical notions and so forth here. Our claim has been, yes, we're radical, but that's in comparison to people who don't practice mere Christianity out there. But our form of Christianity is mere and simple and biblical. It's nothing deeply esoteric or unreasonably mysterious. It's mere Christianity. The stamp of his style was wit, urbanity, clarity, and effortless elegance and disciplined logic. In scholarly circles, Lewis was a respected literary critic before Screwtape surfaced. His Allegory of Love, 1936, a study of the courtly love tradition in literature, was considered a landmark in medieval scholarship. A Preface to Paradise Lost, 1941, was at the center of controversy over Milton's theology and romantic interpretations of Satan. Books flowed from his pen at the rate of one or more a year, and in astonishing variety. Novels, children's books, theology, philosophical apologetics, poetry, literary criticism, and so forth. Many of his books seemed especially designed to remove obstacles facing the Christian in an agnostic age of scientific materialism. That's, I think, where he's at his best and where he's been most help to the Christian church. Books written to combat obstacles facing the Christian in an agnostic age of scientific materialism. The Abolition of Man, which is just a brilliant book, published in 1941 on the rational and social necessity of a normative ethic. And Miracles, all these little paperback books. You can get them a little paperback book for a couple of dollars. Miracles, published in 1947, was a philosophical defense of the possibility of miracles. And these both were closely reasoned philosophical treatises. The Problem of Pain. I have all of these, and they're just small books, and they're fascinating. He's one of those who is so scholarly and so brilliant that it doesn't take him very long to make his point, unlike me. The Problem of Pain, 1940, dealt with the ancient difficulty of justifying the ways of a good God to suffering man. It's called Theodicy in Theology, and he entitled his book The Problem of Pain. If God is good, then how and why do we have pain and evil and misery and suffering in this world? Now you see, you hear that from the non-Christian as their apologetic for their beliefs against us all the time. Well, if God's so good, why are there wars in the world? They're drinking their whatever and smoking their cigarette whenever they're saying that. If God's so good, why do we have wars? Why do we have earthquakes? Why did all those people get, those poor little people, they were innocent. It was just a mother and her children. Why did that train hit them? They think that's very rational to think that way. You say, well, what would our response be? I hope you would know what your response would be. You see, the Christian does have, if he knows Scripture, he does have responses that are logical, that are more logical. All that is diabolic propaganda that these other people think of. And we have done our best over the years to train all of you to think this way. And it does you incredible good in your life. I think it was about a year ago, someone in our church was talking to someone from another church, and that person's accusation of me and of us in general was, well, what our pastor has done through the anointing, your pastor is trying to do through logical intellectualism. He found a fault with being logical, with being smart. And that's such a prevailing tendency in the charismatic walk and in the charismatic movement. And that's one thing we've tried to strike at all the time around here. But look at one of the books that C.S. Lewis wrote, Miracles. Miracles are very rational, if you believe in God. They're very rational, they're very logical, they are totally reasonable if you believe in God. If you don't believe in God, they don't make sense. But that means you don't make sense, because God does exist. If God exists, miracles make sense. If He's the type of God Scripture demonstrates Him and spells Him out to be, then miracles make all the sense in the world. Healing makes all the sense in the world. I believe in healing more now, in miraculous divine healing, than I've ever believed before in my Christian life. What I don't cater to are those superstitious notions of the charismatic movement. And what they have given us is in substitution of what the Word of God really provides for us. It's one thing to believe in miracles and healing, it's another thing to believe in superstitious notions about miracles and healing. But for too many people, and I dare say we still have some in our midst here, or not everyone's here, maybe I'm talking to those who aren't here tonight, but we still have some people in the church who, as you get into this area and you talk about apologetics, and that you just somehow don't see how that meshes with miracles and healing. Somehow one seems to water down the other. One seems to take the spark or the life away from the other. And it goes back to what I just said here a moment ago, that biblical or spiritual truth always has one answer with two sides. And the two sides are perfectly compatible. They're perfectly compatible. It just depends on which one of those you're talking about or emphasizing. One of the things the apologists, see, I hadn't even gotten to my topic yet, but I want to convince you of this angle of thought to begin with. One of the topics the apologists had to bring up all the time was the subject of, well, it seems like the Scriptures are internally inconsistent because they speak of man and his responsibility and God in his predestination. And so which of those is right? Well, the Scriptures inform us that both of those are right, and they're not exclusive of one another. They don't contradict one another. It just depends on which you're talking about. Is man responsible? Well, you better believe he's responsible. But did God foreordain all things? Well, yes, He did that as well. Well, now, wait a minute. That's not fair for man to be responsible for what he didn't plan. Well, who says that's not fair? That's an illogical argument. I mean, you're starting on one right away. You're starting on the path of a very illogical argument to argue that way. And so it's taken very prominent thinkers in the history of the church to combat a lot of these things. Paul was one of the first, and one of the greatest as well. He combated this form of thought of people, well, now what about this, now what about that? And you'll find it interesting to study in the history of the church that the church has, in its history, has a surprising number of lawyer converts. Now, if Christianity is so unreasonable and illogical, I wonder why people who have been trained so diligently along the pattern of thinking and analyzing with their mind, why we have so many converts from the profession of law. Not that many from doctors. Luke is maybe our most notable, but law. People who've been trained in law, they convert to Christianity. Not a lot of people who convert from Christianity to a lawyer, but lawyers converting to Christianity. Right? You see, if we've got the typical, and it's not just in charismatic circles. Let me tell you, you just get in the lay denominational circles out there, and they're anti-reason and thought, just like charismatics are. Maybe they're not into the certain beliefs that charismatics are, but they want to do things their way and just throw things up in the air and see how your confetti comes down. They don't want anything to have final answers for all of us and be able to be nailed down and proved from Scripture or something. They're all the same out there. But it's interesting that we've got people who were in law come right over into Christianity and ended up being, some of the early ones like Augustine, ending up being the most brilliant minds that the church has had. For some of you, see, I'm talking over your head. And I don't know anything to do about it, but just teach every year, and one day you'll see these things as they are. But I know what I'm talking about. I think about all these different things, and I try to present it to you whenever I can, whenever the opportunity is here, just to show you where problems exist in in an understanding of a certain doctrine or something, just so you're made aware of the problem, so you can appreciate the answer better whenever you know it. You may think that you've struggled with the sovereignty of God and human responsibility before, but you've never struggled with that like you'll have to one day. Because I had someone who's no longer a part of the church, but he was a short time ago, come up to me one time and said, "You know this business about predestination?" Said, "I've got it all. I understand it all now." And I said, "Well, good. I hope you'll teach us next week about that, and I'll sit on the front row." See, for anyone to say that just shows to me right away they haven't even studied the issue yet. Hadn't even studied it yet. Hadn't even looked into it yet to say, "I understand all of this now." They don't even... And you see, I used to be there at one time. If you don't even know what the issues are, how complex they are, there's no way you can ever arrive at the answer to the problem. And there's no way you'll ever appreciate the answer if you do arrive or someone arrives at it for you someday. So anyway, this business of the problem of pain. How are you going to defend your Christian belief in God, that He is a good God? He's not a bad God. There's no unrighteousness. There's nothing evil in God. Now, how are you going to explain this? And of course, you would say, well, it's the devil's fault. Well, how are you going to explain him? You see, most people, they jump into this 10-foot-long argument somewhere in the middle. Well, it's the devil's fault. Well, why did the devil end up bad? You've got to keep going back as far as you can go until you get back to where you're supposed to start. And then you start there. You know how people study Revelation and they finally work their way back to Isaiah or something? You got to start there and then work your way ahead. You move forward, not backwards in this walk. We don't want to go back. We want to go ahead. So you have to go way back to the beginning and start with that. Where was I? The problem of pain dealt with the ancient difficulty, and it's still current today, of justifying the ways of a good God to suffering man. Reflections on the Psalms, 1958. Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, 1963. Discuss problems in the Psalms, prayer, and the private devotional life. He wrote about everything. The 7 Chronicles of Narnia. You ever heard of the Chronicles of Narnia? His Space Odyssey and all of this became modern children's classics. Lewis was raised an Anglican, but became an atheist as a teenage schoolboy. His mother died. And so whenever you have something traumatic like that happen, you start questioning God. Why, God? Why did you do this? Or if you don't say that, if you don't use the word do, use the word allow. Why did you allow this to happen? Which of those words would even be correct there? You'd start an argument right there. Why did you do this? Why did you allow this? But most people don't think with their minds. Last winter, around a year ago this time, all I was trying to do was to get you to think about these issues. Think about healing. Think about this. Think about it. Most people, Christianity is a thinking religion. If you don't think, you'll be deceived. That's the whole point in all of our studies here. And some of you got deceived whenever you try to think about it then. It is a thinking man's religion. It just proves you're not thinking. Whenever you don't think, the devil moves right in. And just hold on if you've got arguments. I know this is supposed to be a discussion, but don't interrupt me yet anyway. When you say, but no, wait a minute, I thought the devil was the one that used rationale and logic and arguments and all of that. We just take everything by faith. Well, that's what you get for thinking. You didn't think deeply enough there. Because that's just not true. There's no way he can counter sound reason. Not whenever you have sound reason, your facts are lined up. Think with me. 2 plus 2 equals 4. There's no way he can counter that. He cannot get into your life in that area. He can never get in and confuse your mind and muddy the issue. Put up a smoke screen. Get you to waver back and forth. Question your mathematics. Then give up the faith. Not whenever you've got your facts. You're certain about it. It can be proven. It's logical. It makes sense. Whenever you take 2 apples and join them with 2 more, you have 4 because you can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4 there. There's no way Satan can counter sound reason. Say, well, Jesus just quoted him Scripture. That's right. That's because that's the place you'll find the soundest reason in the universe. It's from the very mind of God. He didn't quote him, listen to me, he didn't quote him Scripture versus reason. Say, well, what Satan was bringing to him was reason. No, he wasn't bringing reason. He was bringing diabolical propaganda to him. What Satan brings out there, so-called arguments against us, Arguments against Christianity and arguments against the faith are no arguments at all. They're smoke screens. Just propaganda. It's demonic, satanic propaganda to get your eyes off what the real issue is. Now this is what the whole first chapter, the first 2 paragraphs of the first letter from Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood is all about. It starts on this one note here. And you know, without me telling you, what my ministry has been geared toward, this very same thing. I'm such a firm believer in it. Once you know the truth and have the truth, there's no way Satan can get at that. It's whenever you've got bits and pieces and you struggle and you doubt a little bit here and there, he just moves right in. He counters you with propaganda. He puts one thing against the other and then destroys both of them in your mind. Puts a little bit of the truth here against a little bit of the truth over there and destroys both parts of the truth. Now you see, they would never let me in Faith Assembly for teaching like this because they have such hyper views about this. Just close your eyes. They just want you to close your eyes and just lift up your hands and just say Jesus, and that'll make everything okay. Just lift your heart to Him and just say, Lord, I believe you. You believe what about Him? What do you believe about Him? You have to be more specific than that. Well, He knows what my needs are. Well, then why, whenever 2 blind men came stumbling to Him, why didn't He ask them, what do you want me to do for you? He knew what their need was. You've got to get everything very localized, and you've got to be very specific. Lord, that we may receive our sight. Then He said, be it unto you according to your faith. And they went away seeing. He could see what they couldn't see. He could see what they had need of. They had need of being able to see. No, just throwing your arms up and just surrendering and saying, oh God, help. There's no way Satan can ever come against pure reason. You've heard of the critique of pure reason, but pure reason is scriptural reason. That's what will make you strong. That's why you know dates and people's names and events and terms and all of that. Instead of just saying, well, I've got it in my heart, under my belt, my pocket, on my shelf. I've got it somewhere. His education at Oxford was interrupted by military service in World War I. After recovery from a shell wound, he returned to Oxford to read philosophy and English literature. His first published work, a slim volume of lyric poetry, Spirits in Bondage, appeared in 1919. A narrative poem followed in 26. After nearly 30 years as fellow of Magdalen College, he left Oxford 1954 for a newly created chair of medieval and Renaissance English at Cambridge University. Lewis moved slowly from atheism through Yeatsian romanticism to absolute idealism and finally theism, returning to worship in the Church of England in 1929. His conversion journey is traced in The Pilgrim's Regress. You ever heard of that book before? Of course, it's a play on The Pilgrim's Progress. That he had to regress because he started off in the Church of England and then he fell away to atheism and all the rest of this, and he had to go back. He had to regress back to the Church of England, back to Christianity. The Pilgrim's Regress, which is a very interesting book. It's an allegory, of course, on the order of Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, published in 1933, and Surprised by Joy, 1955, his spiritual autobiography. And that's a very good book as well. Joy is a characteristic theme in C.S. Lewis's writings. Again, you might not be able to picture a scholar of medieval and Renaissance literature sitting at his desk with a panel walls all around and dusty bookshelves, being a man filled with joy. But why can't you sit in a panel study and be a professor of Renaissance literature and be a Christian and be filled with joy? I don't see why you can't be both of those at the same time. Most of his life was spent in quiet bachelorhood. But in 1956, he married Joy Gresham, an American Jewish Christian convert, when she was critically ill with cancer. So he married someone he knew would die very soon. After her death in 1960, 4 years later, he wrote The Poignant A Grief Observed, which is another book. I don't know how many books he has in print. A Grief Observed, initially published under the pseudonym N.W. Clerk. Until his own death 3 years later, he served as guardian of her two sons. Other writings include The Great Divorce. You ever heard that? 1946. Mere Christianity, 1952. Till We Have Faces, 1956. Christian Reflections, 1967. And Works on Literature and Criticism. And on and on and on we could say about C.S. Lewis. So that's the type of man he was. No formally trained theologian. But you better believe he could sit at the table with the best of them and take their punches as well as deliver a few knockouts of his own. His first book that really put him, a satire, that really put him on the front pages of the Christian world was this little book right here, the Screwtape Letters. Composed of, I think, 31 letters plus an interesting conclusion. Hopefully we'll stay with us long enough to read the conclusion. But a series of 31 letters written by a senior devil whose name was Screwtape to a junior devil who was also Screwtape's nephew whose name was Wormwood. And so he was a very imaginative author as well. He was a writer when he was just a child, and he drew pictures, very beautiful pictures of things. Here's one right here. This is a biography of his by Anne Arnott. It's written basically for younger people, but The Secret Country of C.S. Lewis, which is worth children reading. It's worth adults reading as far as I'm concerned. Anything about C.S. Lewis is worth reading. But there's a picture drawn by him, just as like a 9 or 8-year-old boy. He would think of certain types of stories. He had just a brilliant mind, incredible imagination. That's where he got the space trilogy. That's where he got Chronicles of Narnia. It's a fascinating writing. I don't want to comment on Chronicles of Narnia, though. Screwtape Letters. Here's what some people have had to say about it, or in him as well. The Christian Book Club. C.S. Lewis is the most popular Christian theologian being published today, in the 1960s. The New York Times. Lewis is the ideal persuader for the half-convinced, for the good man who would like to be a Christian but finds his intellect getting in the way. The Washington Post. Apparently this Oxford Don and Cambridge professor is going to be around for a long time. He called himself a dinosaur, but he seems to speak to people where they are. America. Christians are turning again to a master of lucid apologetics, whose religious imagination also encompassed fairy tales and space odysseys, trying to get across a Christian point of view, and so forth. The praises of him just could go on and on. Okay, let me read a few things at the beginning, and then I'll get into his book here. Because he gives a few, his preface here, he gives a few points on how to read the letters to make sure that it's not misunderstood. I don't know if you'll understand this if you understand anything about Milton or Dante, but I'll read this paragraph anyway, the risk that you do understand. The literary symbols are more dangerous because they are not so easily recognized as symbolical. Those of Dante are the best. Before his angels we sink in awe. His devils, as Ruskin rightly remarked, in their rage and spite and obscenity, are far more like what the reality must be than anything we find in Milton. Milton's devils, that's Paradise Lost versus the Inferno of Dante. Milton's devils, by their grandeur and high poetry, have done great harm, and his angels owe too much to Homer and Raphael. But the really pernicious image is Mephistopheles. It is Faust, not he, who really exhibits the ruthless, sleepless, unsmiling concentration upon self, which is the mark of hell. The humorous, civilized, sensible, adaptable Mephistopheles has helped to strengthen the illusion that evil is liberated. I think in all of these works, Mephistopheles, Inferno, and Paradise Lost, he's ranking them, in other words, in order of those he thinks are best able to be understood by the Christian and therefore least likely to lead to some delusion about the truth. Again, that may have gone over your head, but don't worry about it. He talks about some of the names he's given. He said, I fancy that Scrooge, Screw, Thumbscrew, Tapeworm, and Red Tape all do some work in my hero's name, and that Slob, Slobber, Slubber, and Gob have all gone to Slubgob. Slubgob is one of the people here in the book as well. He's given them very appropriate names, you see. Instead of some, romantic, idealized description or title, gives them Screwtape, Wormwood, and Slubgob. We don't meet Slubgob until later on. He said there are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about demons. One is to disbelieve in their existence. And some people do that. He said the other is to believe, but to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. And some have done that. Readers are advised to remember that the devil is a liar. Not everything that Screwtape says should be assumed to be true even from his own angle. I have made no attempt to identify any of the human beings mentioned in the letters, but I think that's not necessary, and so forth. Okay, are you ready to, with the time we have left, to see how far we can go then? You understand what this is all about. Now, it's not going to just deal with reason and argument. We're going to get into all types of temptation into which the Christian falls. But you've got to remember, every time as I read along here, and every time we read about the enemy, the liar, the foe, the wicked one, we're talking about Jesus now. You have to remember that, because this is a devil, a demon, writing to another demon. And so you have to remember their point of view. I think we read earlier that wanted to rescue someone out of the snare of heaven. Because you see, that's written from their point of view. Heaven is a snare. And God is the deceiver and the liar. And it's always, He's our adversary. He's our enemy, I think, is generally the way Screwtape refers to him in his letters. Capital E, he's the enemy. It's the enemy. Like we Christians talk about the enemy. Everything is just topsy-turvy, upside down, from their point of view against us. It's a brilliant book. I can't say enough about it. But I think it very much is mirrored, or has been, in our own teaching abilities and gifts and understandings here around the church. Okay, here's letter 1. I think I'll read the first couple of paragraphs, and we'll stop with that and see what we want to say and discuss there. My dear Wormwood, it all starts off, my dear Wormwood, signed affectionately, your Uncle Screwtape. Oh, let me say this also, because one more thing, because a few of you, I think, probably know nothing about this book. It's pictured, it's very true to what we believe the Scriptures teach here, that demons are after people, demons work here in the earth, they work in the world, and they particularly try to keep people away from the church, away from God, away from Christianity. And so the way he has it here is that various demons are assigned to various human beings to keep them occupied with, he talks here about his materialist friend, to keep him occupied with other things so that he doesn't get near the door of a church, or his mind doesn't get near the gates of heaven. And of course, Wormwood fails. The man that he's been assigned to make sure he does not become a Christian, I think, is a Christian by the 2nd chapter. Yes, he becomes a Christian in the 2nd chapter. And so, of course, Screwtape's argument then begins, don't worry about it. He said, many of them have gone over to the enemy's side, but we've won them back to ours. So he said, don't despair. He said, we still have hope on our side to bring them to our Father's house. He always talks about our Father's house, which is below. So you picture yourself as a Christian. Well, you don't have to picture it, you are, right? And so here's what, and this is very true to Scripture. Don't worry about it being some fanciful space odyssey or something. It's very true to Scripture. This is what Satan and demons think about you. And you see, they have a very real world that's taking place out there as we're studying here tonight. That's the problem that he's saying here. We're going to get into this in the first chapter. He says, keep people's minds on the ordinariness of everything. That everything is just ordinary. We don't want them to even think about us. And how often do we really think about the reality that they are spirit beings, but they have intelligence, they have will, they have might, they have power, they have locale, they are located somewhere, but they have personality, they have will. If they have personality and will, they have plans, schemes, desires. That means they can communicate with one another. They're not like trees or stones. They can communicate with one another. You can have some that are senior and some that are junior. And we see that in Scripture. We see various hierarchies, both with good angels and with evil angels. And for the man who's a pseudo-intellectual, a pseudo-logical thinker out there, he's the one who thinks that he's logical. Well, these things don't exist. No, that's not logical. It's logical that we do have beings like that exist, because many times we can only explain certain events in the world, either by demons or by angels. I mean, even the fellow who's just an outright humanist, a materialist out there, he comes face to face with episodes and times in his life with things where he just can't explain them. There has to be an explanation, in other words, beyond what we can see and touch and feel and analyze. If that's true, then it makes all the sense in the world that demons really do exist. You see, we are the ones who are logical, reasonable, rational, and thinking people to think that they really do exist. Because you hear people talk about these weird experiences, I can't really explain that, and yet they'll be the first to deny the existence of the supernatural, the existence of anything beyond what you can see. But you see, you box your own self into a corner by ever admitting to something that's unexplainable to you, some extraterrestrial phenomenon. As soon as you mention that there's even the possibility of that, you logically, from the point of view of a lawyer who argues his case point by point by point with facts and evidence and witnesses before an alleged impartial jury, as soon as you do that, you're boxing yourself right into a corner, and that lawyer could destroy you then. You're proving yourself not to be logical at all. Everything that has to do with God and the Scriptures is very logical. People say it's illogical to base your whole life in this one book. Think of the millions of books which have been printed and published. And you have picked one of those, written thousands of years ago. And you say that every single thing in there is true and right and honest. But from a purely non-prejudiced, non-biased point of view, the Bible has stood the test of time. The Bible has stood the test of its critics, where other books have passed off the scene. A person would not be in their right mind to deny the fact that the Holy Scriptures are unique. And when you say unique, you mean one of a kind. A person is not in his right mind to say that the Scriptures are not unique. You see, I don't care whether the person is a Christian or not a Christian. He's not in his right mind. And if he's not a Christian, that would explain why. The Scriptures, I mean, think about it. Written by, a great variety of authors from various cultural and educational backgrounds over a period of several thousand years in 3 different languages. And yet there has never been proven by anyone something to be internally inconsistent here in this book. Now, the jury may still be out on several questions because we just don't have enough evidence. Maybe we suspect that there's textual problems here that can't be proven, but at least no one can prove the opposite. We can't prove our point of view, but they can't prove theirs. The jury may still be out. I can think of a couple of issues where the jury is still out. We just don't have enough evidence here in this passage. We just don't have enough. But in saying we don't have enough doesn't mean that we do have enough for their side to prove their point is true. It's never been proven, not by anyone. And again, someone is not in their right mind to deny that. That'd be one of these pseudo-intellectuals out there that you run into in a bar somewhere that thinks he's thought a lot about religion. Well, I remember my grandmother knew a story about the Bible where it was contradictory. What evidence is that? We're not going to believe a story your grandmother told you, and you're telling us the story yourself under the influence of alcohol. We're not going to believe you then. Haven't I always said before that as long as we do have the truth about a matter according to what the Scriptures present to us, that we should be able to present those facts as well as some other person's facts about the same question to an impartial jury, and they'll be condemned and will be acquitted. That has to be true. If facts are facts, and if truth is truth, then it's true. Of course, there's no such thing as an impartial jury if we're talking about a non-Christian world out there, though. We'll talk about aided and unaided reason here later on. My. Anything we need to discuss before I go on? What did I read? My dear Wormwood. Okay, that's something we're going to get to. There are two different types of reason. There's aided and there's unaided reason. See how far we want to go with that now. Gets into the question of what we call natural theology, with a capital N and a capital T. Natural theology is a Roman Catholic doctrine. It's not a Protestant doctrine, but natural theology is based upon natural revelation.
For the continuation of this message, please turn the tape